This last week started out really great for me, in part because I got the opportunity on Monday night to go to Brandon Reyes' senior recital. Now, if you did not get the opportunity to go, let me just say, first of all, you missed out because it was pretty amazing. He started out with this timpani piece that was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. And if you thought that a guy standing in between five big brass timpanis is a little odd and awkward at times, if that's what you thought, you would be correct. But it's also really cool when done the right way, and really fun. And he did that. He did a couple other pieces, and he spent all his time on these vibraphone pieces. So think like xylophone, but cool, right? Okay, that's kind of what it is. A good way, put it right. There we go. And here's the really neat thing about it. About halfway through it, I'm just sitting there going, I just don't like him. Because he is so ridiculously talented. And he is. I mean, it's like ridiculous amount of talent. But here's the funny part that goes with that. See, a lot of times we want to blame, we want to feel things about people or whoever because of talent that they have, but talent only gets them a very small part of the way towards where they need to go. It just does. Yeah, I mean, you all know that person at work that maybe isn't as talented or isn't as bright or isn't as whatever you want to put on it, but yet they seem to have done so well. Sometimes it's because they just put in this unbelievable amount of work. I can tell you right now, I mean, Brandon is ridiculously talented. And I'm not diminishing that at all. But he works his tail off at what he does. I don't know anybody that practices more than he does. I'm standing back there today and I'm listening to the band. And again, I'm just getting ticked. Because I'm like, Ryan Lauterbach is just one of the most talented guitar players I have ever heard in my entire life. And he sits up there and he just tears through this solo like it's no big deal. And I'm like, you jerk. I couldn't do that if I tried, kind of deal. But the reality is that yes, he has talent, and I'm not diminishing his talent, but I can tell you that the hours and hours and hours that he has spent learning to perfect his craft as a guitar player, I mean, I bet you could not even begin to add them up. I mean, the hours. John over here playing the bass, Malik, Brady, all of our singers. The amount of talent that is there is absolutely amazing, but talent in and of itself only goes so far. We began talking a couple weeks ago about this idea of being stronger. And we talked about how as a church and how as individuals, one of the things that needs to take place is that we need to have a stronger faith. That has to be the foundation of who we are as believers. But I think there's a very significant piece that has to be added to that. And I think it's really awesome that we talk about it on Palm Sunday. Because if we look back historically, as far as the church is concerned at Palm Sunday, here's what happened at Palm Sunday. What? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were saying something to me. I got distracted. There we go. It easily happens. My ADD kicked in. All right. So on Palm Sunday, here is what took place. Jesus is preparing to go into Jerusalem, and this is the beginning of the end of his earthly ministry. This is the beginning of, he is going to be betrayed by Judas. He is going to be wrongfully arrested. He is going to be put on trial in front of all these people and accused of things that he has not done. He is going to then be convicted in that trial. He is going to be sent to Pilate. Pilate's going to say, I don't want to kill him. Let's just beat him. And they're like, fine, you can beat him, but we still want to kill him. And so he's beaten and left for dead and yet still put up on a cross and crucified. And he dies on that cross. And in that moment, he takes upon all of the weight of the sin of humanity, past, present, and future. That's what he's getting ready to go do. And here's the amazing thing. He knows it as he heads into Jerusalem. It's not like it's going to catch him off guard. It's not going to be a surprise kind of thing. He knows exactly what's going to happen before he ever begins to go down that road into Jerusalem. And here's what happens. As he's heading into Jerusalem, there are these people and they're waving palm branches and they're like, Hosanna, Hosanna, just like we sang this morning. I mean, they are applauding him. They are worshiping him. And yet as he is traveling down this road, I know what has to be going through his mind is that you're saying that today, but what are you going to say on Friday? Yeah, my week is starting out great. Monday's a high point, right? Sunday's a high point. But what's Friday going to be like? And how is it that you can say this today, but you're going to say that later? And so there is this part of me, this part of my humanity that says, why didn't you just call them out right then and there? Why didn't you stop the donkey, get off, find a soapbox to climb up on top of, and just begin to give everybody what for, because you know what's going to happen. But instead, he looks on them with this incredible grace and love, understanding that these are the very people that he has come to offer himself as sacrifice for. Many who will fall away from him, many who will reject him, many who will not even want to listen to the message that he has for them. And he continues to make his way towards the cross. For me, as a believer, I've often joked, they have these things called spiritual gift inventories, okay? In the Bible, we talked about it in a sermon series a couple years ago that we called Juicy Fruit, talk about the fruits of the Spirit. And one of the fruits, okay, one of the spiritual gifts that we talk about is this gift of mercy. And I often joke with people that I just don't have that one, okay? I wasn't sure where in God's grocery aisle you went to get that, and I didn't get it, okay? And so I'm just not very merciful to a lot of people. I'm kind of a cut and dry kind of person, and so my wife is phenomenal at that, and thank goodness, because then she balances me out when it comes to that. But it's just not my gift. And so I'm one of those people that says, Jesus, just why didn't you torch them right then and there, you know? I mean, just boom, just be done with it. But Jesus instead chose to show grace. I want us to go today to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, where we're going to talk about how this grace is extended beyond the cross. Okay? Grace was not a one-time happening. Grace was not just a point in history where something amazing happened, where Jesus offered himself for you and for me. But grace is something that has been woven into the fabric of time, that is a part of who God is at his very core and how he chooses to interact with us. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, I'm going to start reading in verse 9. He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness." Now, we have to have some backstory to this to understand it. Paul says, look, I have this issue, and we don't know what the issue is. But he calls it a thorn in his flesh, or a thorn in his side. In fact, back in verse 8, this is what he says about it. "Concerning this, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take it away from me." There's this thing, this issue. We have no idea what it is. People have offered all sorts of suggestions. That maybe it was something having to do with him physically, whether it was his health, whether it was the way he physically looked, whether it was some sort of limitation or whatever he might have. We don't know what exactly it was, but we know it was significant in the life of Paul. He pleads with God to take it away. Now, most of us would say that if God was a graceful God, if God would show mercy upon Paul, what he would do is he would take that away. Right? If there's something that's causing pain, that's hurting, that's difficulty, whatever that might be, someone showing grace is someone who removes it. But that's not what God does, and this is why. He said, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Therefore, I will most gladly boast all the more about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may reside in me. So I take pleasure in weaknesses, insults, catastrophes, persecutions, and in pressures because of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. See, we have this idea in our culture today that grace, mercy, kindness, whatever words you want to begin to attach to those spiritual thoughts, okay? That happens when someone removes hardship. It is permeated into almost every aspect of our culture. Okay? And I don't care what side of a political aisle you happen to sit on or where ideologically you are with things like that, but the reality is that we have begun to think that kindness, that grace, that mercy equals either a handout or the removal of penalty from someone's life. And here in this moment, as Paul is explaining to us what's going on here, he says, look, this is what God has done. God is showing me that I find power in weakness. Now, how in the world can that be? Well, there are a few just kind of modern day examples that I think help us at least wrap our mind around it. I talked about how great the band is, and they are, and I love working with them. And John Thill is a ton of fun to work with, and he is an awesome bass player. But I have a feeling that the first time he ever picked up a bass, he probably did not sound as good as how he sounds today. I know that's a stretch for me to think that, okay? But it's probably true. But if somebody had walked up to him and said, oh my gosh, I know it's the first time you've ever picked up a bass, but you're the greatest bass player I've ever heard in my entire life. You're better than every great that's ever recorded. You are the absolute best of the best. Well, all of a sudden, there is very little need for John to get any better. If he's already the best, why does he have to work to improve? It's one of the dangers of parents with young children thinking that their children are the absolute best at whatever sport or activity or theater or dance or whatever it might be, whatever those things are. When they think that their kid is the best, well, then the only way somebody else could gain something, the only way somebody else could get something over them is if somebody did something underhanded. Because my kid's the best. Well, my kid should be the pitcher on the baseball team, but this coach has got him playing right field. It's all political. Well, it has nothing to do with the fact that your kid couldn't throw a strike to save his life, and the other kid has a 1.1 ERA. Okay, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that it was all political, so your kid couldn't get in there. See, we have this idea that grace, that mercy, that kindness, that these kinds of attributes, that it's when we are given something, that when something negative is removed, that's when we get it. And here Paul is explaining to us that sometimes the greatest act of grace that God can have in our life is allowing us to struggle with something significant in our life. That seems so counterintuitive. Because if I have a struggle, if I have difficulty, wouldn't it just be better if it was removed? And Paul says no. And here's why. For power is perfected in weakness. See, on my own, if I am honest with God, I have absolutely zero power. On my own, I do not have the ability to save myself from sin. On my own, I don't have the opportunity to look at others with the kind of love that He desires for them rather than selfish motivation. On my own, I am incredibly weak and powerless. But it is only when I recognize that weakness within myself that I understand where true power comes from. And it comes from Him. And it's not the kind of power that is authoritative or that is like a dictator. Is the kind of power that provides possibilities. I got a call yesterday afternoon. We were playing church league volleyball and having a moderately good time doing that. I say moderately because I always look forward to it until I'm done, and then I remember that I'm 40 and can't do what I could do when I was 30. And so we're having a good time, and I get back out to the car. In fact, I was already hurting, so everybody else was deciding where we were going to grab something to eat afterwards. I'm like, I'm going to the car. You tell me where we're going. I have to go sit. So I literally just walked out the door, went and sat in my car, and I do what I always do when I get in the car. I pick up my phone, because I'd left it there, to see what messages I'd missed, what emails, what phone calls, whatever. Well, the executive loan officer that we're supposed to meet with tomorrow night had left me a message like 5 minutes after our volleyball game had started. Well, maybe he's just calling to confirm. I thought, but no, we did that yesterday. I had a whole teleconference meeting with him and everything. We're all set up and ready to go. And so this is the voicemail that I heard. Chad, we have a problem. First of all, not the thing that you want to hear less than 48 hours before that meeting, right? Okay, just not what you want to hear right there. So I'm already starting to have that sick in the pit of my stomach kind of feeling, you know? And this is what he says. He said, Chad, I have lost my wallet. And I can't fly without my ID. And the bank has my passport and I can use that, but they don't open until 9 o'clock on Monday morning. My flight was supposed to leave at 7 in the morning. I've checked with Southwest. The earliest flight that I could get after 9 o'clock wouldn't put me in until Monday night. I wouldn't be able to make our meetings. I'm not sure what we're going to do. Please call me as soon as you get this. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Can I just tell you, in that moment, I felt incredibly weak. There's nothing I could do to fix the problem. I didn't have time to drive to Oklahoma, pick him up, and bring him back here. I didn't have the ability to somehow come up with an ID that would get him past TSA and onto that airplane. There was no way for me to do that, and I felt absolutely powerless. And I'm sitting there, and in one of those moments that you have that's not real spiritual, you know what I mean? Maybe you guys have never had those, but I occasionally have those. And I'm just thinking, okay, God, what next? You know, it's like, seriously? We were supposed to close on this thing back then, and now this was happening, and we're so excited, and you've got to be kidding me. And so I call him back. He's like, Chad, did you get my message? Yes, Jerry, I got your message. He goes, you're not going to believe this. What? He said, a police officer just showed up at my house with my wallet. They found it 2 miles away from my house in a wedding chapel parking lot, and everything is still in it. They think that a kid stole it while he was out that day, got nervous, and ditched it out a car window, and somehow somebody found it, gave it back to police. It had significant cash in it. It had credit cards and all that kind of stuff, and none of it had been touched. So me, going into PR moment right there, said, well, Jerry, we're just going to assume that this is a miracle of God. And he desperately wants you to come meet with us and approve our loan. And so that's why the police has returned this wallet to you. And he starts laughing. He goes, well, I'm beginning to think the same thing, Chad. Let's get this thing going. And so I laugh. And in that moment, I was absolutely weak. In that moment, I was totally and completely powerless. There's nothing that I could do. And yet God steps in with a reminder that the power doesn't generate with me. The power comes from Him. Now, see, that's an easy one for me to wrap my mind around because there's no way I could come up with that ID. There's no way I could get him here. But the same God that provided the power in that situation is the one that has the ability to provide power in your family, where you think you can fix it and you think you can make it right, but the reality is you are powerless. And God has the ability to provide the power to make the difference in your family's life. in the life of your finances, in your life at work, in your life at school, wherever it might be, He is the one who provides power. And so Paul reminds us in this moment, he said, look, I've had this issue, and I have desperately begged and pleaded with God that He would take it away. But the reality is that God chose not to take it away to remind me where my power comes from. And it has made such an impact on Paul's life that this is how he responds. I'll go back and read verse 10. So I take pleasure. Okay, now that begins to sound a little twisted, right? Okay, I take pleasure in weaknesses, insults, catastrophes, persecutions, and in pressures. Now, in and of itself, that just sounds weird. But then he goes on and he says, because of Christ. I take pleasure in weaknesses because of Christ. I take pleasure in catastrophes because of Christ. Because see, it's no longer about what Paul is able to do. It's no longer about what Paul has the capacity to accomplish. But in those moments that Paul recognizes this is a situation that I'm in, God is in control. He is able to take pleasure because he knows that God can handle it. When Rachel and I were first married, I was not serving in a local church. We were on the road full time. And we were singing and doing concerts and stuff, and I was speaking for conferences and conventions and all sorts of interesting things. And we literally traveled from one side of the United States to the other. By the time it was all done, we had a big Airstream land yacht coach, which was really cool, which we did not buy. There was a person that we'd been at their church. They're like, you need something better than a conversion van and a trailer to travel in. Because we had Caitlin by that time said, look, I need to make this available to you to be able to use. It was awesome. Rachel especially loved it because typically once we hit the road, like within a mile of hitting the interstate exit, you know, on the on-ramp, she's asleep. And so it was a whole lot more comfortable to sleep in that thing than it was in the van. And it was just great. And we would be traveling and doing these different things. And there would be times when there was zero money in the bank account. Now, please hear me. I don't mean there was little money in the bank account. Okay, I don't mean, well, you know, we still had that $500 in our emergency fund sitting someplace or whatever. No, I mean there was zero money in our bank account. There was one time we were down in Mississippi and we did not have enough gas to get home. Okay, we didn't have money to buy gas to get home. It was a crazy life, and I'm just telling you, it was nuts. And that particular Sunday morning, we were supposed to be singing at this really big church. And we were thrilled because big church typically meant big offering. We were going to kind of be set for the next month, and it was going to be awesome. And we walked out of there, and the guy handed me a $150 check. A situation that normally we would have gotten paid 10 times that. We got a $150 check. And no place to cash it. No way to get gas to come home. Nothing. Rachel is not pleased at that moment, okay? You understand that. She had every right not to be pleased. She's worried and freaked out. What are we going to do? How are we going to get home? All kind of stuff. I got a phone call literally at lunch from a buddy of mine that said, hey, I saw you're down in Mississippi. What way, you know, where are you going from there? I said, well, we're heading back towards Ohio. He's like, hey, will you come sing at my church tonight? We didn't have anything planned for that night. His church is a little tiny country church, like 40 people on Sunday morning, right? And he said, well, on Sunday nights, we normally have like 12, 15 people, but there's a couple other churches around. We're going to get them together. So we go there, and they have like 50, 60 people in this church. So they're loving it because it's like bigger than a big Sunday morning for them. And we go in there and we sing, and Rachel sings high notes, and you can see dust like, you know, shaking off the chandeliers in the room. And we're having all, I mean, it was just a fun night. And we were both so frustrated and everything else. It was just kind of like we forgot about everything else, and we just sang and we did our thing. And at the end of it, they took up an offering, and we looked at it, and my buddy said, hey man, I wish you could be more, but you know how it is. I'm like, well, yeah. And we had this sounds really horrible in a spiritual setting, but one of the ways that you would plan for what you would do is when they would take up a love offering, typically we would always get at least $3 per person in attendance. So if you had 50 people there, you'd expect a love offering about $150, right? And that's what we got in that morning. Well, that night, with about 50 people there, we got a love offering of over $1,500. So the big place that was supposed to provide the big check gave us the little tiny thing. And the little tiny place that was supposed to give us the little thing ended up giving us the big thing, except they gave it to us all in cash so we could put gas in our vehicle and go home. It was awesome. And I was reminded in that moment that in my weakness, He is strong. And it got to the point, we had seen that happen so many times that after a while, whenever things would get crazy, we would kind of look at each other and go, okay, how's He going to do it next? And there was almost this idea of taking pleasure in our weakness, taking pleasure in catastrophe, because we knew He was going to do something and it was going to be awesome. We couldn't explain it. We didn't know when it was going to happen. A lot of times we would have loved it if He would have done it a week earlier than He did, okay? I'm just telling you, that would be really great. But in our weakness, we find His strength. See, if we're truly going to be stronger as a church, if we're going to be stronger as individuals, like in the video, we're going to be stronger moms and dads and employees and employers and students and teachers and coaches and whatever else we might be, if we're truly going to be stronger, we have to understand where the strength comes from. And the stronger I try to be, the weaker I really am. But the more I realize my dependence on God, the stronger and more stable my life becomes. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have difficulty. It doesn't mean that there aren't struggles and situations that are just so difficult sometimes, but our strength is found in Him. I am so looking forward to what God is going to do in the life of our church over these next weeks and months that are to come. There's part of me that says we are so weak. There have been times in the life of our church that we've had more people than we do now. There have been times in the life of our church that we've had more finances than we do now. There have been times in the life of our church where we have more energy than we do now, and all of these different things. But yet in our weaknesses, we are reminded of His strength. And what God is going to do is always going to be for His glory and for His kingdom. God, I thank You for the opportunity that You've given us today to be reminded of the words from Paul. That God, in our weaknesses, we find Your strength. God, I pray that each one of us individually would be reminded of that today. That we would be reminded that we ultimately are not the ones in control, that we ultimately are not the ones that have to figure out how to fix every situation, but God, You are in control and Your strength is perfect. So God, I pray that in this week, as we go out and we live our life, that God, You would remind us where our strength comes from. That God, it would not be about what we could accomplish or what we could do. And God, let us find pleasure, let us find joy in knowing that You are the one that can do these things. Because God, when we see that it is You, it removes the pressure from us and reminds us of how great You are. God, thank You for meeting with us today. God, I pray that we would leave here differently than how we came, that we would rely on You in all things. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks so much for being here today. Thanks for being a part of what we do. We don't have to tear down today, so that is awesome. And for those of you, again, that are going to meet with us tomorrow night, can we just meet down here, like say in 10 minutes, give you time to say hi to everybody and that kind of stuff, and then we'll meet over here to talk about our meeting tomorrow night. All right? Thanks so much. Have a great week.